The rain pelted the windshield of the black Mercedes as it pulled up to the gleaming entrance of the Mayfair Grand, one of London's most prestigious five-star hotels. The building rose like a monument to British elegance, its Georgian architecture perfectly restored, its brass fixtures polished to mirror brightness, its uniformed doormen standing at attention despite the miserable October weather. Inside the vehicle, Ozzy Osbourne checked his watch and grimaced. The flight from Los Angeles had been delayed by 4 hours due to storms over the Atlantic. His connecting train from Heathrow had broken down twice, and now he was running late for what might be the most important business meeting of his career. At 75, opportunities to revolutionize the music industry didn't come along often, and the consortium of investors waiting for him in the hotel's private dining room represented exactly the kind of forward-thinking partners he needed for his ambitious new project. He glanced down at his appearance in the dim interior light of the car. The long flight and multiple delays had taken their toll on what had started as a carefully planned professional look. His shoulder-length silver hair was disheveled from hours of frustrated sleep attempts in airplane seats. His black leather jacket was wrinkled from being used as a makeshift pillow, and his dark jeans bore the evidence of a turbulent flight that had included an unfortunate encounter with a cup of coffee during particularly severe turbulence. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could show your support with a like. Your encouragement means the world to writers like me and helps stories like this reach more readers. "Should I wait, Mr. Osbourne?" asked his driver, a professional chauffeur who'd been handling celebrity clients long enough to recognize when someone was having the kind of day that might require backup plans. "No, that's fine," Ozzy replied, shouldering his worn leather messenger bag, the same one he'd carried to recording sessions for over 30 years, now containing contracts and business proposals instead of song lyrics and chord progressions. "I'll grab a quick shower and meet them in an hour. Shouldn't take long to check in." The uniformed doorman approached the Mercedes with the kind of practiced efficiency that marked truly high-end establishments, but his expression shifted noticeably as Ozzy stepped out of the vehicle. Where there had been professional courtesy, there was now barely concealed distaste. The doorman's eyes traveled from Ozzy's unkempt hair to his scuffed boots, lingering disapprovingly on every detail that didn't conform to the hotel's unspoken dress code. "Good evening, sir," the doorman said, his tone carrying just enough politeness to avoid outright rudeness, while making it clear that Ozzy's presence was unexpected and unwelcome. "Are you here for a delivery, or perhaps meeting someone?" The assumption that he couldn't possibly be a guest stung more than Ozzy cared to admit. He'd faced down stadium crowds, record executives, and decades of critics, but there was something particularly insulting about being dismissed based purely on appearance by someone whose job was supposed to be hospitality. "I have a reservation," Ozzy replied calmly, pulling out his phone to check the confirmation details. "Osbourne, for the Lancaster Suite." Whoa, the doorman's eyebrows rose slightly. The Lancaster Suite was one of the hotel's most expensive accommodations, but his expression remained skeptical. "I see. Well, you'll need to speak with the front desk about that." Inside the lobby, the Mayfair Grand lived up to its reputation as a temple to British luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors, while oil paintings of countryside scenes adorned walls covered in rich burgundy wallpaper. Leather armchairs were arranged in intimate conversation areas around antique Persian rugs, and the overall effect was one of understated elegance that had been carefully cultivated over decades of catering to the world's elite. The young woman behind the mahogany front desk looked up as Ozzy approached, her professional smile faltering as she took in his appearance. Like the doorman, she seemed unable to reconcile his disheveled look with the opulent surroundings of her workplace. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying the kind of crisp pronunciation that suggested expensive education and careful training in dealing with the hotel's typically well-heeled clientele. "How may I assist you?" "I have a reservation under Osbourne," he repeated, setting his identification on the marble counter. "The Lancaster Suite." The desk clerk, her nameplate read Victoria Whitmore, picked up his passport with obvious reluctance, as if handling it might somehow contaminate her pristine workspace. Her eyes widened slightly as she read the name, but rather than recognition, her expression suggested suspicion. "I'm sorry, Mr. Osbourne," she said, pronouncing his name as if it tasted unpleasant. But I'm afraid there's been some sort of misunderstanding. The Lancaster suite is reserved for Mr. John Osbourne, and frankly, you don't appear to be, well, the type of client we typically accommodate in our premium accommodations." The casual classism in her tone was breathtaking in its audacity. Ozzy had encountered prejudice based on his appearance throughout his career. Restaurants that wouldn't seat him, shops that followed him around as if he were a potential shoplifter, venues that treated him like a security risk until they learned who he was. But this level of open discrimination, especially at an establishment that prided itself on service excellence, was remarkable even by his extensive experience with snobbery. "I am John Osbourne," he said quietly, his Birmingham accent becoming more pronounced as it always did when he was angry or frustrated. "That's my legal name. The reservation was made by my management company 3 weeks ago, and I believe you'll find everything is in order." Victoria's laugh was tinkling and dismissive. "I'm sure there's been some confusion, but as you can see," she gestured around the opulent lobby, "the Mayfair Grand maintains certain standards. Our clientele expects a particular level of respectability. Perhaps there's a more suitable establishment nearby where you might be more comfortable." Her supervisor, a middle-aged man with the kind of carefully groomed appearance that suggested decades of working in luxury hospitality, had been observing the interaction from a discreet distance. Now he approached with the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations while maintaining the hotel's reputation for impeccable service. "Good evening," he said, extending his hand to Ozzy with professional warmth that seemed genuine until you noticed that his eyes remained cold and calculating. "I'm James Pemberton, the evening manager. I understand there's some confusion about your reservation." "No confusion on my end," Ozzy replied, not taking the offered handshake. "I have a confirmed reservation, I've provided identification, and your staff seems to think I'm not suitable for your establishment based purely on my appearance." Pemberton's smile never wavered, but his tone became subtly condescending. "Mr. Osbourne, I'm sure you understand that the Mayfair Grand has built its reputation on providing a certain atmosphere for our discerning guests. We have dress codes and behavioral standards that ensure everyone's comfort and enjoyment." He paused, looking Ozzy up and down with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years making quick judgments about people's worth based on their appearance. "Perhaps there's been a booking error, or maybe someone made this reservation as a prank. It happens more often than you'd think with celebrity names. In any case, I'm afraid we simply cannot accommodate you this evening." The dismissal was final, delivered with the kind of polished rudeness that expensive hotels had elevated to an art form. Ozzy felt the familiar rage building in his chest, not the wild, destructive fury of his youth, but something colder and more controlled. He'd learned over decades of dealing with industry prejudice that losing his temper only reinforced negative stereotypes and gave people like Pemberton the justification they were looking for to treat him poorly. "I see," Ozzy said calmly. "So you're refusing service to a paying customer with a confirmed reservation because you don't like the way I look?" "We're refusing service because you don't meet our standards," Pemberton corrected smoothly. "It's nothing personal, simply a matter of maintaining the atmosphere our regular guests expect and deserve." The lobby had grown quieter as other guests and staff began to notice the confrontation. A well-dressed elderly couple seated near the fireplace were openly staring, while two businessmen at the concierge desk had paused their conversation to watch the drama unfold. The attention made Pemberton more confident rather than more cautious. He was performing now, demonstrating to his upscale audience that the Mayfair Grand didn't compromise its standards for anyone. "Very well," Ozzy said, pulling out his phone. "I understand your position perfectly." The first call he made was to his assistant in Los Angeles, speaking clearly enough that anyone nearby could hear every word of the conversation. "Sarah, it's Ozzy. I'm standing in the lobby of the Mayfair Grand in London, and they're refusing to honor my reservation for the Lancaster suite because, and I quote, I don't meet their standards, and I'm not the type of client they typically accommodate in their premium accommodations." He paused, listening to her response. "Yes, the same hotel where we're supposed to be hosting the investors' dinner tonight. The same hotel where Sir Richard and the streaming executives are expecting to meet us in 45 minutes. Pemberton's confident expression flickered slightly at the mention of Sir Richard. There was only one person in British business circles who went by that title and first name. and his involvement suggested this wasn't some random tourist who could be dismissed without consequences. The second call went to his UK publicist, and Ozzy made no attempt to lower his voice as he recounted the evening's events. "I want you to document everything that's happened here tonight. The refusing of service, the discriminatory treatment, the assumption that I couldn't possibly be a legitimate guest based on my appearance. Yes, I know it's going to be a story. That's exactly why I'm calling you." Victoria had gone pale during the phone calls, finally seeming to realize that this might not be the simple case of mistaken identity she'd assumed. She whispered urgently to a colleague, who immediately began frantically typing on a computer terminal, apparently attempting to verify the reservation details they'd been too quick to dismiss. The third call was the one that changed everything. Ozzy dialed a number he'd hoped not to need, waited for the familiar voice to answer, then spoke with the calm authority of someone who'd learned to wield power effectively. "Richard, it's Ozzy. I'm afraid we're going to need to change the venue for tonight's meeting. The Mayfair Grand has decided they don't want my business." He listened for a moment, then continued. "Yes, discrimination based on appearance, in front of a lobby full of witnesses. I know, it's 2024, but apparently some places haven't gotten the memo." Sir Richard Branson's reaction was audible even to those standing nearby, his voice carrying clearly through the phone's speaker as he expressed his outrage at the treatment of one of his longtime friends and potential business partners. More importantly, his immediate response made it clear that this wasn't just about changing dinner venues. This was about the kind of systematic discrimination that had no place in modern hospitality. "Don't worry about tonight," Sir Richard's voice carried across the suddenly silent lobby. "I'll handle the venue change. But Ozzy, this kind of treatment is unacceptable, and it needs to be addressed properly. You have my full support in whatever action you decide to take." As Ozzy ended the call, Pemberton was in urgent consultation with Victoria and two other staff members who'd been summoned from the back office. The computer terminal that had been used to dismiss his reservation was now displaying information that clearly contradicted everything they'd assumed about the disheveled man standing in their lobby. "Mr. Osbourne," Pemberton said, his voice noticeably less confident than it had been 5 minutes earlier. "Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding at all," Ozzy interrupted. "You made your position perfectly clear. I don't meet your standards. I'm not the type of client you want, and you assumed my reservation was some kind of prank because someone who looks like me couldn't possibly afford your premium accommodations." The fourth call he made was to the CEO of the hotel chain that owned the Mayfair Grand. As one of the world's most recognizable celebrities and a legitimate business mogul in his own right, Ozzy had developed relationships with senior executives across multiple industries over his 5-decade career. The conversation was brief, professional, and devastating in its implications for the staff members who'd made their discriminatory decision in such a public forum. "Sir Marcus," Ozzy said when the call connected, "I'm calling to let you know about an incident at your Mayfair Grand property that I think you need to be aware of." The rest of the conversation was conducted in lower tones, but the body language of everyone within earshot made it clear that this was not a complaint being dismissed or minimized. While Ozzy was on the phone, Victoria had finally accessed the full reservation details on her computer system. What she found there made her face go from pale to ashen. The Lancaster Suite reservation for John Ozzy Osbourne, booked by Osbourne Management Limited, prepaid in full for a week's stay, with additional charges authorized for hosting a private dinner for 12 guests, including several names that even a hotel desk clerk would recognize as belonging to some of Britain's most prominent business leaders. More damaging to the hotel's position was the notation in the system indicating that this was part of a larger corporate account that included regular bookings for Ozzy's UK business activities, Sharon's television production meetings, and various family events. The Osbourne family had been loyal customers of the hotel chain for over 15 years, representing hundreds of thousands of pounds in annual revenue. "Mr. Osbourne," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper as he finished his call, "I've found your reservation in our system. Everything appears to be in order, and we sincerely apologize for the confusion." "Confusion?" Ozzy repeated, his tone making it clear that he wasn't going to accept such a transparent attempt to minimize what had happened. "There was no confusion. You looked at me, decided I didn't belong here, and refused service based entirely on your assumptions about my appearance and worth as a person. By now, The lobby confrontation had attracted the attention of other hotel guests, several of whom had recognized Ozzy despite his disheveled appearance and were documenting the incident on their phones. The elderly couple by the fireplace turned out to be longtime fans who were horrified by the treatment they'd witnessed, while the businessmen at the concierge desk had already begun discussing whether they wanted to continue staying at a hotel that practiced such obvious discrimination. Pemberton made one final attempt at damage control, his professional mask slipping to reveal genuine panic as he realized the scope of the public relations disaster unfolding in his lobby. "Mr. Osbourne, I assure you this was simply a miscommunication. We would be honored to accommodate you in the Lancaster suite with our compliments, and I'm prepared to personally ensure that your stay exceeds all expectations." "No," Ozzy said simply. "I won't be staying here tonight or any other night. Neither will the 12 business associates I was supposed to be hosting for dinner, several of whom happen to be major investors in your parent company. Neither will my family when they're in London, which had been a regular occurrence for the past 15 years. He shouldered his messenger bag and turned toward the door, then paused to deliver his final statement in a voice that carried clearly throughout the marble-floored lobby. "You made a business decision tonight based on prejudice and assumptions. You decided that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly be worth your time or respect. That's your right as a private business. But it's also my right to take my money elsewhere, and to make sure that everyone knows exactly why I'm doing so." The doorman, who'd initially treated Ozzy with such disdain, was now holding the door open with exaggerated deference, his face a mask of professional regret that couldn't hide his personal mortification at being caught in such an obvious display of classism. As Ozzy stepped back into the rainy London night, his phone was already buzzing with calls from journalists who'd been alerted by the other guests who'd witnessed the incident. The story was going to be everywhere by morning, not just the celebrity angle, but the larger issue of discrimination in hospitality and the assumptions people made about worth and respectability based purely on appearance. The alternative venue Sir Richard secured turned out to be far superior to the Mayfair Grand, a private dining room at an exclusive members club where Ozzy's appearance raised no eyebrows whatsoever, where the staff treated him with the respect accorded to any valued guest, and where the business meeting proceeded exactly as planned, resulting in a groundbreaking partnership that would revolutionize how independent artists distributed their music. The contrast couldn't have been starker. At the members club, Ozzy's disheveled appearance from travel delays was met with understanding and assistance. A quick shower in the guest facilities, emergency dry cleaning for his jacket, and even a selection of appropriate business attire if needed. The staff's focus was entirely on ensuring his comfort and the success of his meeting, rather than judging his worthiness based on superficial criteria. "Quite the evening you've had," Sir Richard observed as they settled into the elegantly appointed private dining room. "Though I have to say, their loss is definitely our gain. This venue is much more conducive to the kind of serious business discussion we need to have." The 12 investors around the table represented a who's who of British business and technology leadership, and their unanimous reaction to hearing about the hotel incident was one of disgust and disbelief. Several mentioned their own experiences with similar discrimination, while others expressed concern about the broader implications for hospitality standards in London's luxury market. "It's 2024, said Margaret Thornfield, CEO of one of Britain's largest streaming platforms. "This kind of discriminatory behaviour is not only morally reprehensible, it's terrible business. They just lost one of the music industry's most influential figures as a customer, along with everyone in his network, based on the most superficial possible assessment." The business discussion that followed was productive beyond anyone's expectations, with the discrimination incident actually serving to strengthen the relationships around the table. There was something powerful about a group of successful professionals who'd all faced various forms of prejudice in their careers, coming together to create something meaningful in response to witnessing such obvious unfairness. By the time the evening concluded, Ozzy had secured not only the investment partnership he'd been seeking, but also commitments for several additional collaborations that hadn't been part of the original proposal. The incident at the Mayfair Grand, intended to exclude and diminish him, had instead created an opportunity for deeper professional relationships and more ambitious business ventures. The media coverage began within hours and continued for weeks. The The story had every element that modern audiences found compelling: celebrity involvement, clear-cut discrimination, dramatic confrontation, and ultimate vindication. But what made it particularly resonant was how it highlighted issues that went far beyond one rock star's bad evening at a luxury hotel. Social media exploded with stories from ordinary people who'd faced similar treatment at various establishments: refused service, questioned about their ability to pay, made to feel unwelcome based entirely on their appearance. The bounce appearance discrimination hashtag trended globally for days, with thousands of people sharing experiences of being judged and dismissed based on assumptions about their worth. The Mayfair Grand's initial response was a masterclass in corporate damage control failure. Their first statement described the incident as a misunderstanding and emphasized their commitment to excellent service for all guests. When that was met with widespread criticism, they issued a second statement apologizing for the breakdown in communication, while still avoiding any acknowledgement of discriminatory behavior. It wasn't until the third statement, issued after a weekend of devastating social media coverage and multiple major business clients announcing they were taking their events elsewhere, that the hotel finally acknowledged what had actually happened and committed to meaningful changes in their policies and staff training. The financial impact was swift and severe. Beyond the immediate loss of Ozzy's business and his associates' events, the hotel faced a wave of cancellations from guests who didn't want to be associated with an establishment that practiced such obvious discrimination. Corporate clients pulled conferences and meetings, celebrities who'd been regular guests took their business elsewhere, and the hotel's online reviews plummeted as people shared their own negative experiences. More significantly, the incident sparked a broader conversation within the luxury hospitality industry about unconscious bias, staff training, and the assumptions that colored interactions with guests who didn't fit traditional expectations of wealth and status. Several major hotel chains announced enhanced training programs focused on eliminating appearance-based discrimination, while industry publications dedicated extensive coverage to examining how systemic biases affected customer service. The individual staff members involved faced consequences that ranged from mandatory retraining to termination, depending on their level of involvement and their response to the subsequent investigation. Pemberton, the evening manager who delivered the final refusal of service, was dismissed after it emerged that this wasn't his first incident involving discriminatory treatment of guests who didn't meet his personal standards of respectability. Victoria, the desk clerk, kept her job but was required to undergo extensive diversity training and was placed on probation with clear expectations about future behavior. In interviews months later, she acknowledged that the incident had been a profound learning experience about her own unconscious biases and the impact of making assumptions about people based on their appearance. 3 months after the incident, Ozzy received a personal letter from the hotel's new general manager, who'd been brought in specifically to rebuild the property's reputation and implement comprehensive anti-discrimination policies. The letter included a detailed account of the changes that had been made in response to his experience, an invitation to visit and see the improvements firsthand, and a commitment to ongoing efforts to ensure that no guest ever faced similar treatment. Ozzy's response was gracious but firm. He acknowledged the hotel's efforts to address the problems his experience had highlighted, but made it clear that rebuilding trust would require sustained commitment to change rather than just policy updates and public relations campaigns. His recommendation was that they focus on genuine cultural transformation rather than trying to win back his specific business. The broader impact of the incident extended far beyond one hotel, or even the hospitality industry. It became a case study in business schools about the financial costs of discrimination, referenced in diversity training programs across multiple industries, and cited in academic research about the persistence of class-based prejudice in contemporary society. For Ozzy personally, the incident served as a reminder of how far society had come in some areas, while remaining frustratingly stagnant in others. Despite 5 decades of success, global recognition, and obvious wealth, he could still be dismissed and humiliated by people who couldn't see past superficial appearances to recognize his worth as a person and a customer. But it also demonstrated the power he now wielded to create change when discrimination occurred. His celebrity status, business connections, and media platform allowed him to transform a personal slight into a broader conversation about systemic issues, turning his individual experience of prejudice into an opportunity to address similar treatment of others. who might not have the resources to fight back effectively. A year later, when Ozzy next visited London for business meetings, he chose to stay at a small boutique hotel in Shoreditch that had built its reputation on welcoming creativity and individuality rather than enforcing rigid standards of conventional respectability. The contrast with his Mayfair Grand experience was absolute. Staff who were genuinely interested in ensuring his comfort, service that focused on substance rather than appearance, and an atmosphere that celebrated diversity rather than demanding conformity. You know what the strangest thing about that whole Mayfair Grand incident was? He mentioned to Sharon during a video call from his hotel room. It wasn't even about the money or the inconvenience or the public embarrassment. It was about the casual cruelty of it, the way they looked at me and immediately decided I wasn't worth their basic respect. Sharon, who'd been fielding her own share of media calls about the incident and its aftermath, nodded knowingly. That's what discrimination always comes down to, isn't it? The decision that some people deserve dignity and others don't, based on criteria that have nothing to do with their actual character or worth. The conversation reminded both of them why the incident had resonated so broadly beyond the immediate circumstances. It wasn't really about a celebrity being mistreated at a luxury hotel. It was about the everyday reality faced by millions of people who were routinely judged, dismissed, and mistreated based on assumptions about their appearance, background, or perceived social status. The lasting legacy of that rainy October evening wasn't the temporary embarrassment of one hotel or the vindication of one celebrity who had the resources to fight back. It was the broader awareness it created about the persistence of discrimination in all its forms and the responsibility that everyone, particularly those with platforms and influence, had to call it out when they encountered it. Looking back on the incident years later, Ozzy would describe it as one of those moments that crystallized larger truths about society, human nature, and the ongoing struggle for dignity and respect in a world that too often reduced people to superficial categories and assumptions. The hotel had judged a book by its cover and learned too late that their assessment was not only wrong, but costly in ways they'd never anticipated. The real lesson wasn't about the dangers of mistreating celebrities. It was about the importance of treating everyone with basic dignity and respect, regardless of how they looked, or whether they met arbitrary standards of respectability. Because you never knew who someone really was, what they'd accomplished, or what impact they might have on your business and reputation if you chose to judge them by their appearance rather than their character. Sometimes the most powerful responses to discrimination weren't dramatic confrontations or angry outbursts, but simply the quiet determination to ensure that the consequences of prejudice fell where they belonged, on those who chose to practice it rather than those who were subjected to it. Thank you for reading this powerful story about dignity, respect, and the consequences of judging people by their appearance. If this tale of standing up against discrimination resonated with you, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could show your support with a like. Your engagement helps stories like this reach more readers and reminds us all of the importance of treating everyone with basic human dignity.